So let's say miracles do happen. So what? What are we supposed to do with that information?
Well, it's not just that one small piece of information, it's all of it together. And I guess really it comes down to, can you live a better life as a Christian than as a non-Christian? That's effectively your question, right?
No. What? What? No, I just asked, what are we supposed to do with that information? Other than believe in it.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm taking too many logical jumps forward. But it's the same, essentially the same conclusion, or the same question you should get to from where you're at right now. Because when you say, like, what do we get from the fact that miracles happen? Like, if a person was healed miraculously, then we could, the next question is, well, can this benefit me or other people who might need healing? If this miracle can be somehow reproduced. And if the miracle can not be reproduced scientifically, but it can be reproduced through a request, which is prayer, then it implies that some sort of deity exists. And if this deity exists, then maybe there's some sort of purpose to life, et cetera, et cetera.
So if I still don't really know if that was an answer to the question. So assuming miracles happen, what are we supposed to do with that information? Perhaps we're supposed to pray more and hope that people get healed?
Well, no, I mean, I'm not trying to say that that's necessarily the conclusion that I would directly go down if you'd ask. Okay, let me put it this way. It's a strange question to ask based on discussing the text. What the text you have here is miracles don't happen. The only reason I really came on to discuss this was to say that you can't say for an absolute certainty that they don't happen, just that you're not convinced that they ever
I don't
happen.
say that anything is an absolute certainty, but I don't go around saying, well, I'm not 100% sure, but every single time I say something. I mean, you can't prove with 100% certainty that the thing you just said was not, you want to shove a pumpkin up your ass. And I could sit here and be like, oh, that's weird that you said you want to shove a pumpkin up your ass. You'd never be able to prove that you didn't say that, right?
So,
but
to some degree of certainty, yeah, we can prove certain things, like, to a reasonable degree.
Yeah. But again, nobody goes around saying, I'm not 100% certain, but gravity exists. We just say things. There are certain things that we say are, that we have confidence in. Yeah. I have as much confidence saying that miracles don't happen than I do in saying that leprechauns don't exist.
Sure, that's fair. I mean, I guess when you put it that way, we actually agree that they're possible, and you're just wording it differently.
Yeah, I think that they're possible, but I think you could never have a rational justification for one.
Well, there I disagree with you fundamentally. I think that you can use natural means of investigation to come to very rational and reasonable conclusions that involve the supernatural.
How?
Well, that's exactly how I became a Christian, because using natural means of investigation, I looked into the claims of Christianity, specifically that Jesus existed, died, and rose from the dead. And these are still natural means of investigation, like specifically the investigation of ancient historical events and their authenticity. And using that plus the logical process of elimination, I can say that every other explanation for why these ancient Greek documents exist doesn't hold as much water as the actual supernatural explanation.
So you think because some old texts, the stories converge with each other and tell a common narrative, although they differ in some ways, you think the odds of those people either simply being mistaken, lying, the words getting accidentally mistranslated, meaning being added to it by well-meaning people who weren't there and just simply didn't know, but in faith believed in certain things, like the addition of the Johannine comma and stuff like that, you think those things are less likely than God in the flesh existing, dying, and resurrecting? Because to me, that doesn't make any sense.
Right, so I think that you should put the first of all, to back up just a second, The main point I was getting at just a second ago was that this was a rational and reasonable conclusion that I can, well, not conclusion, a rational and reasonable process of thought that I used with natural means of investigation to come to this conclusion. So that was the main point I was trying to make. But to answer your direct question now, I say that you have to put the supernatural as the least likely one first. So no, I don't think that you just automatically assume the supernatural is the most likely. But in trying to prove the other one's true, you can't. And the supernatural is the only one, like, it becomes the most probable simply because the other ones have serious problems with them.
So to me, that's an argument from ignorance because what actual proof that a miracle takes place do you have? Or took place do you have?
So the evidence would be the testimony,
Whose testimony?
these documents.
Whose testimony?
So whoever wrote these documents, these ancient Greek documents,
Okay, who wrote them?
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, etc.
Who are those people?
People who were living in the first century and apparently witnessed of supernatural events.
So no scholar thinks that any of the Gospels were penned to papyrus when Jesus was alive, or even after he, or even anywhere close to after he resurrected. I mean, the earliest ones are dated to, I think, around 80,
Right, a few decades later.
maybe like 60.
Sure.
Okay. And the authorship of the Gospels is also just totally unknown. I mean, they're called the Gospels according to these names, not the Gospel by Mark. Hi, I'm Mark. Nice to meet you.
Within the first century and the end of the first century, they were attributed to these specific authors and nobody questioned it.
What do you mean nobody questioned it?
At that time, nobody questioned that they were the specific authors. It was just accepted by pretty much all Christians that these were the authors.
But we don't even know who the authors are. And we have I'm not aware of any documentation from like extra biblical sources of people being like, yeah, those people that wrote the Gospels, they know what they're doing.
Yeah, there was, I read about this a couple weeks ago. I don't remember, it's not that fresh in my mind right now, but there were definitely people who specifically said that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were the authors of these documents within the end of the first century.
Okay, I'm not aware of any.
Yeah, look it up.
But I guess I can. What am I supposed to look up? Who were the people that in the first century that witnessed the authorship of the Gospels? I don't even know what I'm supposed to look up.
Yeah, I don't remember how I stumbled upon it. It was probably in a book, to be honest.
Okay, well, next time bring that. Just if you happen to look it up, and next time you come back, we can talk about that.
So, well, here's the problem with that. So there's a lot of different people who are really good at memorization of these obscure, stupid facts names, and they're useful and good. And when I read them, I definitely can remember enough to compare them to counter arguments, right? And then try to prove these people wrong and see which one's the winner. And I can do that fine, but what I can't do is I can't memorize these facts. But I don't think that's necessarily important, because once you can come to a conclusion reasonably, you don't have to memorize all the details that got you to that point. You can just remember the conclusion and then stick with that, right?
Yeah, believe me, I know. I have a lot of books over here, and I don't have anything memorized, but they guide my thinking.
Right, it's the same principle. So for that reason, like, I'm not going to be able to memorize all these different people's names. Some of them I do. Like, I remember that Irenaeus and Polycarp, they definitely have a lot of specific, really early viewpoints that I debate with a lot of different Christians on. But that doesn't help me much with atheists right now. But no, I mean, this is just one of those facts where I know it exists. I can't prove it, but I know it's true, and I know that I read it recently.
That's why I'm not saying that you made any of that up, but we're just trying to. I don't know what we're doing anymore. We were talking about miracles and stuff. So what I think we're having a discussion on is if we're trying to weigh the idea that somebody could have just invented stories that aren't literally true or anything, like for example, Jews take the Old Testament way less seriously than Christians do.
Well,
Like
there's just many
religious Jews. I'm not
differences of
talking about
beliefs.
secular Jews. Religious Jews take it a lot less seriously than a lot of Christians do, which is kind of silly, right? Or I wouldn't say silly. Silly was a bad word. It's just kind of funny, right? So if we're trying to figure out what's more reasonable, to believe in the literal miraculous claims of the Bible, or to believe that people who wrote these stories, who we don't even know who they are, that the stories were made up for different reasons, that they were translated multiple times, and errors happened as that happened, and meanings got added, things got taken out, and slowly a story started to evolve, so on and so forth.
So first of all, one big difference between you and me is that you don't want to believe that it's true, that Christianity is
I
true, and
believe it
I
was
do.
true for 25 years.
Right, and you don't want to believe it anymore, and so you don't believe it anymore.
No, I was convinced of the truth of it. And then when I started looking at the evidence, it eroded my trust in it because, to me, an objective reading of it only leads to that, which is why a huge number, like the fastest way to make atheists is to either send them to Christian school or seminary or something like that. It's extremely common.
Sure, I agree with that, but for
So
different reasons.
the information that caused me to not believe in Christianity anymore was information that I was digesting while I was Christian the whole time. So
Right, but
your
I would say that.
characterization of me and my motivations is wholly incorrect.
So first of all, I would say that it's very possible that, and actually more probable, that there are good. The reason a good number of Christians become not Christian when they go to seminaries because they go to the wrong type of Christianity school. And
Right?
if
There are no
most
true
denominations,
Scotsmen.
well, no, if most denominations disagree with each other on the fundamentals, then they can't all be right because those are mutually exclusive. So one of them has to be right. The other ones are all wrong, regardless of which one is right. Right?
And it
So
happens
you,
to be the one you believe in.
well,
That's kind of neat how that worked out
Well, I
for
mean,
you.
I could use the same argument for you with atheism. Still, I mean, it's the same bigger picture. But to finish that one point, like if you're in college to believe in incorrect religion and you're not convinced that it's correct because it's incorrect, you might incorrectly say that it's incorrect for the wrong reasons.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yeah, it was a
I
little
was trying to pay
confusing.
attention. It just bounced off my head for some reason.
Sure. I mean, well, it's kind of a side point, so I'm just going to skip it
That's okay.
because the bigger picture was I actually was an atheist for most of my life, and then my mid-20s I converted to Christianity, but I didn't do that until I first wanted to convert. And then I still didn't convert yet. Only after wanting to convert for a few months, I eventually did convert to Christianity. But the fact that I wanted to necessarily preceded me actually converting. I wasn't going to consider it until I wanted to first become Christian. So what I'm getting from that is I think that people won't become Christians unless they want to.
Okay.
But
I
what
never
I'm, okay,
argued that. I don't know what's going on at this point.
so,
Or I never argued against that, I should say.
no, but you, the reason in the first place that you don't want to believe that it's true isn't because that it's not logically sound. It's that you just don't want it to be true.
Okay, well, I
That's
explained
both
how
options.
that's not the case for me. I don't feel like doing it again. So,
Sure. Okay. So okay, back to the whole question of miracles, and then your bigger question was, well, how does that, if miracles happen, how does that help you?
what can we do? I don't mean like it makes. I don't mean how can it help me? Like how can it make me feel better? Because that's kind of all I've heard so far. I mean, what are we supposed to do with that information? Like when we were talking about does the universe operate according to fixed natural law, or well, that's sort of actually relevant. Is the universe created by a god, but it's a deist god, or is the universe uncreated? It looks exactly the same. So that added assumption produces absolutely nothing that is epistemologically useful at all. So I'm trying to ask what epistemological benefits can anybody in the world gather from accepting miracles, either accepting that they can happen or specific ones, other than validating their own beliefs and feeling good and stuff?
Well, I wouldn't say that miracles by itself is necessarily something. I mean, it's strong evidence of a theistic God, a God that actually intervenes in the world. And it's probably strong evidence if they're miracles and not just black magic or something. It's strong evidence of some sort of a benevolent God. So if that's the case and we have some sort of benevolent God, then there's probably a right way to operate and a right way to do things, and he's probably going to help you to do them if you're willing to.
So if
You
again, that's just validating my feelings.
So no, it's not. The purpose isn't to try to validate how we feel. It's more like there's now an objective task that I have to fulfill, and some sort of ability to fulfill it that's beyond any reasonable means. Like I can, for example, if I need to step out and like. I'm remembering this specific instance from Stargate SG-1 that I saw many years ago when he has to take the leap of faith. I think the episode was called Leap of Faith. And he literally steps forward, and it turns out there's an invisible piece of ground before him, and he didn't see it, and he's able to step on it and walk on it. It's the exact same concept.
They stole that from Indiana Jones.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's a cheap show. I mean, they spent over $1 million per episode, but it's still relatively...
Right. I've never seen an episode, but anyways, takes a leap of faith.
Yeah. So the idea is that if there's a specific task each of us has to fulfill, and part of our purpose of life is figuring out what that task is, and then also fulfilling it, and maybe both kind of intermingled along the way, then that's important. And if there is a God who does miracles, then he can also assist us in ways that we aren't necessarily able to see directly through the evidence around us that's sensible, but it's still real.
So, all I heard, I'm not trying to be like insulting or anything. I'm just saying, all I hear from that is it validates somebody's feelings or worldview. I don't see how it doesn't prove anything to anybody else. I don't see how it can possibly be used in any kind of epistemological framework for solving any kind of problem. It just validates somebody's worldview and makes them feel better.
Okay, let me give a practical example. But okay, first of all, let me clarify. You're not talking about feelings. You mean like there's no practical utilization of this, right? That's what you mean?
I don't think it has an effect that goes beyond the individual who believes it.
Okay. So I think that's... So first of all, there's a good number of examples in the Bible where if this is true, it specifically does exactly what you're saying it can't do. Where God actually actively changes things in history. He changes situations and events and circumstances to allow people to have a certain outcome to their actions for some specific bigger picture purpose.
Okay.
Which is exactly the opposite of what you're saying. You're saying that it's essentially just internal to your worldview and nothing else. And if what I'm saying is true, then this actually has real effects, practical effects on history.
But it's just to be part of God's plan is what I got from that.
Well, no, it's so each individual person would have this sort of like an ideal purpose or mission that they have to accomplish, and they have to figure that out and then accomplish it. And so each person, the Old Testament heroes that there are, they were extreme examples of this, almost caricature examples of this idea, because, for example, Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt and through the desert and into the Promised Land was this actual, real historical event, but it was a giant one, and it was it had a lot of symbolism too. But that's an example of how this is not just internal to your worldview, and it is a mission, and it does affect history.
Okay. I mean, I still don't get what anybody is supposed to use that information for.
So the idea of if miracles can happen, and if God can do miracles, and He's real, and He has missions for us, etc., and if things like Moses are true, and all of that stuff is true, then each one of us has some degree of a mission just like that, where we need to trust in God's plan and try to figure out His plan and try to enact His plan all at the same time. And it might not be as big, and sometimes it will be as big as Moses and that kind of stuff, but sometimes it won't be as big, it'll be smaller. And if that's true, then miracles might be one of the ways in which God will help us to do those things.
Right. So, I mean, once again, other than to validate somebody's worldview, you're just talking about if these things are true, then people should trust that God has a plan for them and that He'll help them do things. There's no framework here. It's literally you're just describing a state of mind and like nothing else.
Yeah, I keep implying something that I guess is very clearly explicit in my own mind, but I didn't make it explicit. And that's the idea that if necessary, God will align all of the circumstances of your life and the actual history, objective history, to make His plan happen with your own individual cooperation, even if it requires Him doing a miracle for you.
Again, I don't see how anybody could use that information to do anything other than to tell somebody, well, Jennifer, you just need to trust in the Lord and He'll take care of you.
No. It's a little different. It's saying, hey, miracles can happen. Like, you don't see how this thing can actually line up, but little miracles can line up, like things that you might just chalk up to coincidence, and then big miracles can happen, things that are scientifically impossible. They can happen, and so yes, you're right that it at that point in time where you're acting on this, it is just a belief in your mind. It's a worldview. But if this is true, then acting on it will produce the actual right results and not just some sort of awful, humiliating failure.
How would you know that it was a miracle?
If there's no other way to explain it and every other way falls short.
But that's just an argument from ignorance. You haven't proved the thing. You've just said it's not other things.
Sure, and so you keep relying on this concept of argument from ignorance as being some sort of an infallible way of saying that this is an absolute impossible conclusion to draw reasonably. Whereas
no, I'm telling you that you're not giving me any reason to believe your claim.
Well, so what I'm getting at is if it is the best explanation we can have for now, we can adopt it for the time being indefinitely. However, if it's
not good,
actually true, indefinitely will be forever.
But it's not good at all.
Sure it is.
Because we have no good, like we have no confirmed miracles at all. There's always a naturalistic explanation that makes more logical sense. I don't see how any naturalistic explanation could ever, even in principle, not make more sense than a miracle happened.
Have you ever heard of the healings of Lourdes in France from the late 1800s? The countless, maybe thousands of healings from Lourdes?
No.
Okay, so one of them was examined by a medical doctor in the late 1800s in Lourdes, France. So there was this. It was all about this this young girl, Bernadette, like 17 or something years old, who apparently saw the Blessed Virgin Mary, and then something, and then there's a spring of water that miraculously came up. Yeah, you can look it up. Lourdes. It's spelled Lourdes, and one of the doctors of the time examined a patient of his who had such a badly damaged eye that it would never be able to see again no matter what anybody did to fix it. It was literally impossible for it to see. Now, he used the Lourdes water, the patient used the Lourdes water to heal his eye, and he was able to see out of it, except physically it was no different. So physically it should not have been possible medically for him to see out of that eye, but he was able to see out of it because of the Lourdes water. There's no way to explain that scientifically.
I understand that this is a cop-out answer, and it's not my answer, but the whole thing can be made up. That is possible.
It's definitely not in this case, and you will even be convinced very quickly that it's not made up.
Right, and I'm not saying it's made up, but what's more likely? Just examining it in a vacuum. What's more likely, that it's made up or that some miracle is happening?
Yeah,
if you want to tell me some miracle is happening, and give me a reason to believe it's a miracle other than it's not other things. I mean, it could literally be anything. It could be something that something that we just don't know about yet. But a miracle, you can't even know how a miracle happens. I mean, that's not even possible.
So first of all, I agree with you. In a vacuum, we have to say that it is much more likely that it was made up. I agree with you. But we aren't in a vacuum, and so that's not the circumstance here. And there's a lot of context. And so the other point that you have, I agree with that too. It could simply be the answer is we don't know. That's a form of agnosticism about this. And
sure.
Sorry,
are you Catholic?
Yes, I'm very Catholic.
Okay. So it says that, like, this place, Lourdes, there are thousands of healings that have been reported, but only like a really small handful the Catholic Church even recognizes.
No, that's not true. The whole Catholic Church has fully verified and approved of this apparition. Oh, you mean the miracles?
No. Other people go to this place, and there are pilgrimages there. There's sites like this in Mexico too, where people go to ask for like miraculous healing, and thousands of people have claimed it, but the Catholic Church recognizes a tiny fraction of them.
Oh yeah, I agree with that.
So even the Catholic Church is like, well, I mean, is the Catholic Church's faith weak? If anybody claims any miracle and you believe in God and God can do anything, then why not just believe in any single one of them? To doubt any of them, to me, would be weak faith.
It's not weak faith, it's strong reason.
Sorry?
It's not weak faith, it's strong reason.
To doubt a miracle. So you think it's so if we imply strong reasoning, we doubt miracles.
Yes, you should doubt miracles, yes.
Then why accept a tiny fraction of them and discount all the other ones, even though it's the same place and it's people fully convicted in their beliefs and they're claiming that they were miraculously healed?
For the exact same reason I was explaining to you a second ago. Because if you don't have a strong enough set of evidence and logical reasoning to conclude that something actually is miraculous, you shouldn't.
But the only reason to believe that it's a miracle is because we don't know what else it was.
Well, it's not just that we don't know what else it is. All of the other circumstances surrounding it, if they strongly point to a miraculous conclusion and every other explanation has serious, serious holes, only then can you say this is probably a miracle.
So again, that's kind of just an argument from ignorance, I think, but also I just don't see how it can ever be rational to say that this particular event represents the suspension of all natural law and the intervention of a supreme being that intervened in a way in which we could never test it, know it, understand how it happened, or anything. I don't understand how, I forgot how I began this. I don't understand how that's the more logical, accepting that is more logical than it was something else.
Right. So first of all, I agree that you can basically keep the agnosticism and say, let's just say indefinitely that we'll wait for a better conclusion. But that indefinitely will last forever if the miraculous answer is actually the objective truth about the situation. So just saying we don't know because all the other ones fall short is essentially the same as saying, well, we, well, okay, I'm going to abandon that sentence because I started it wrong. But related to that is the idea of you're assuming that there's not religious context that points to a miracle. And in this case with Lourdes, for example, there is a lot of strong religious evidence that points to it. For example, Bernadette claimed, first of all, she was religious and she was doing religious activities like praying. And also she claimed to have seen a vision of the Blessed Virgin Mary, who instructed her to find the water, which there was no evidence of any water there until Mary told Bernadette to dig in a certain spot of dirt. Then this miraculous spring came up that nobody expected to happen, and the miraculous spring was healing people. That's why I'm calling it miraculous. So all of these things are very thoroughly steeped in the context of religious ideas. So that's why we can also not just say we don't know what it is scientifically, but it could potentially be religious. It could be a miracle.
Okay, I mean that's always an option, I guess, but I don't see anything convincing beyond just we don't know what else it was.